Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for coming here. We have a really good speaker, Rich Muhl from the State Regional Water Quality Control Board. Covers about 12 counties and has been involved in a lot of stuff that I'm going to let him talk about, especially with these fires. As you know, we had our own catastrophic fire, and you get a lot of erosion coming off of those situations, so we'll talk about that. And then there will be a opportunity for a question and answer at the end of the session. I would like you all to, I will prefer that I'll pass the mic around so that you can speak directly into the mic and we can get it recorded. We will be showing this on channel 8 3 times coming period. So if there's anybody that would want to view it, we will have a disc available for anyone that didn't make it. And what I'd like right now is, you don't have to do the mic, but if you could just start right there, John, and just introduce who you are so that we have some introductions.
Okay, John with CRA Building Inspector.
Yeah.
Jerry Mello, PES.
Mike Laird, I'm a planner for the county.
I'm Skaggs Condor, Birdwood Condor.
Aaron Jackson, Condor.
Daniel DeBattay, engineering with the county.
Dave Ruby, engineer for the county.
Ray Nichols, CRA Road.
Mike Miotti, CRA Road.
Steve Stewart, CRA Road.
Tom Burger, CRA Road.
Good. Galen Greif, local engineer.
Ted Coughlin, CRA Inspector. Ray T-Charnett, Inspector.
Steve Hollandy, junior engineer with Calaveras County. Kirby Johnson with the office.
All right. Thank you all for coming. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich, and he can do his presentation, but keep in mind, you prefer to have the questions as you're going along here?
Yeah, just if you have questions, just ask them as I'm going, because if you're thinking about it, someone else probably is too and just didn't ask. So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Take it away, Rich.
All right. As Duke said, my name is Rich Muhl. I'm a senior environmental scientist at the Regional Water Quality Control Board in Sacramento, and I do a lot of different things. I do construction. I do industrial. I'm also working a lot with the fire, both the Butte and the Valley Fire right now, trying to help the counties kind of deal with the post-fire construction or stabilization, which is an interesting scenario. So we're helping out as much as we can, along with the other agencies with Fish and Wildlife and some other things. And so I'm going to talk a little bit today about construction stormwater management. And this picture has nothing to do with Tuolumne County. I just like the picture because if the excavator falls into the Sacramento River, it's a little hard to get out sometimes. So this is sort of what's going on here. One of the contractors made a little bit of an error, and it went right into the river. So I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls that people have made when they've worked on construction projects. Some of those have resulted in enforcement actions. So I'm going to talk about some of the things people are not doing regarding the permit. What's going on with the permit right now is, as everybody knows, the new permit came out about 6 years ago. Everybody kind of had it figured out. Economy was doing pretty good, and then the economy sort of tanked. At that point, construction kind of stopped. And now people seem to have forgot about the permit. Some people coin it selective amnesia. I don't know, you can call it what you want, but at any rate, a lot of people don't understand the particulars for the permit, particularly risk level 2 and risk level 3 requirements. So that's what we're finding. So a lot of it is going to these sites and sort of retraining on-site personnel on what the requirements actually are. So we've been pretty patient about doing that, and we're trying to work with everybody on it. But on the other hand, you still, if you sign up for the permit, you have to implement the permit. So I'm going to talk about a few things. I'm going to go through sort of a site scenario, kind of a case study on a site that didn't follow the permit. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what they didn't do. And I'm going to try and use that to kind of show an example of what you don't want to do. And then I'm just going to talk about some other things. So we'll just get going. The first thing is, if it's over an acre, you have to file for coverage. So it's you need to file for coverage if it's clearing, grubbing, grading, or excavation over an acre. A lot of people forget to file for coverage. It's clearly over an acre, and they don't file for coverage. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the rainfall erosivity waiver gets used a lot. It's a great tool. It's designed for projects that are short-term, that aren't going to be a risk to water quality. But if you try and get a waiver right now and you're going to go through November, probably not going to happen. You're going to be a threat to water quality. There's other issues. So the rainfall erosivity waiver, if anybody that is not familiar with it, basically you calculate in Russell the soil loss. Whoops. You calculate the soil loss, and then if it's less than 5, you qualify for that particular waiver. Has to be between 1 and 5 acres. So in some ways, it's a good tool, but it gets overused. The other thing to pay attention to is the start date and the ending date. When you file for the waiver, you put your start date and you put your ending date. Well, everybody pretty much knows with construction projects, they hardly ever get going when they're supposed to. So invariably, what happens is you start a month later. Well, now that's a month out of your waiver. And so then you end up a month later, you don't qualify for the waiver. So that's one of the problems we're having. There's a new permit that's going to come out in about a year, and we're looking at putting some end date or some way to end the waiver, some way so we know it's complete. Sort of like probably a notice of, like you do a notice of termination under the construction permit, it's likely be the same thing. You have to send in photos, you have to show it's stabilized. That's the other problem. People say, I have a waiver, I don't have to do anything. Well, yes, you have a waiver, but you still have to install best management practices, BMPs. So that's the other issue we have with waivers a lot. So. Yes?
Can you re-establish the start time of the waiver if you're starting a month late? Can you qualify your waiver?
Yes, you can, but that only works so long, and then you get outside of that R, you get above that 5 on the R value. So in the summer, you can kind of get away with that. If it's 20, 30 days, that's not a problem. If you try and do that in the winter, it won't work. And so then you've got to file for full permit coverage. So it creates an issue. So just make sure that when you pick those waiver dates, you're actually picking the date you think that you're pretty sure it'll start. It doesn't take long to get a permit anymore. I mean, it's all done in smarts. You don't have to mail it in and do all this other stuff, so it goes a lot quicker than it used to. It used to be 2-3 weeks sometimes if they were busy. It's not that long now. So you can kind of compress it a little closer to your actual start date. Just a suggestion, because I love the waiver. I think it's a great tool, but it just gets overused sometimes. Just a little bit of background. When it rains, the raindrop comes down about 20 miles an hour, hits the soil surface, blasts apart those particles, and it causes erosion. Typically on a construction site, about 70 to 80% of the erosion is sheet erosion, and that's really what you're trying to catch. So what we want to see when we do inspections is erosion control. Erosion control protects that soil surface from the impacts of the raindrops. If you kind of think about it, it makes sense. Better keep it locked in place and trying to catch it with a fiber roll or some other BMP around the edge of your project. It's just not going to work as well, especially on a site like this. They've got major problems here. So I want to talk also about the BAT-BCT standard. So in the permit, it requires BMPs to have to meet the BAT-BCT standard, and a lot of BMPs don't. Hay bales, probably not BAT-BCT. If you want to build a check dam, hay bales work great, but not so good. There's better technology out there. One of the things when we're doing inspections, we take a look at what BAT-BCT is and make sure that people are using the available host of BMPs. And I'll show an example in a minute, kind of what I'm talking about. And this is getting people in trouble. There are some old BMPs that work in certain situations, but there's better BMPs out there.
Hey, Rich?
Yes?
BAT, BCT, what's that acronym?
I don't know, here we go. I always forget it. Best available, here, I got it written down. Best available technology, economically achievable, and best conventional pollutant control technology. I always forget that, so. But there are a number, in the last probably 5 years for construction sites, the BMPs have gotten much better. The technology for erosion control has just gone leaps and bounds better. For sediment control, kind of the same. I mean, it's still silt fence, fiber rolls, your basic BMPs. That hasn't changed a lot. But for erosion control, it really has. So I'm going to go through a case study now I'm not going to talk about who it is, where it's at, or anything else, but it's in the foothills. It's a pretty high elevation. It's a large kind of commercial-like site. It's got the red soils you can see here, a lot of slopes to it. Goes right off, discharges directly to a creek on the other side of the road. So started working in the winter. That's the other thing. Started working this project in the winter. So that right there is a red flag for us. We're going to really pay attention for any project that's working in the winter, but particularly one this size. So what they did is they went out and their BMPs are straw, hand broadcast straw. Now when you look at this picture, you can see a lot of shadowing. You can just see soil. It's worse than shadowing. So this is not going to protect the soil from the impacts of the raindrops once it starts working. Clearly not BAT-BCT. This is kind of what I was talking about. There are better BMPs out there that would have worked much better. The other thing they're using on this particular site is a lot of plastic. Visqueen. Visqueen blows off the slope. So a lot of what happened to them is every time it's on a, I'll show another picture, but it's on a big slope. Here's another picture during the rain. You can see they put some more straw down because we'd been there multiple times. But again, no tackifier, wasn't tacked down, hand broadcast, and it just washed away. You can start to see the rilling that's occurring. This is all going across, discharging directly into the creek. Another shot of the same site. Again, a lot of plastic. What would happen is the wind would come up. It's a big slope, exposed to the wind. It'd blow the plastic off every single time. So we'd come back. I'd come back early in the morning. We have a couple inspectors in this area, so depending on who it was, somebody come at night, somebody come in the morning, really didn't matter. The plastic would be blown off the slope. So that was a huge issue for us. And then the other thing is you can still see bare soil. If I can see bare soil, that's not a good installation of that particular BMP. Straw works, but you got to get it on really thick. Can't do it like this. Again, same type of thing. So now we've been there. I've been there at least 3 times. I've told them they need to have better BMPs. The city's gone out and done a stop work order on them and done multiple times. Still, these are the BMPs they're going to use, and it's not an issue. So, according to them. So this is what's going on. So we're going out here over and over and over. The other thing is, oh, this got fuzzy, sorry about that. But anyway, they have a storm drain here. And this storm drain, you can see how dirty the road is in front of the site. And the storm drain, they just got a couple rock bags. That's their particular BMPs by the storm drain. It's not going to work when it really starts raining. So now it starts raining. I'm out there, it's early in the morning. I had to wait to take pictures because I was way before the sun came up. But at any rate, it was discharging. It was raining pretty hard, but it was still discharging. You can see it's coming through the wall. There's a little hole in the wall by that rock. It's ripping out there. But it's also going all the way around. The other thing is they have part of their storm drain system in, which could have been good, except that they didn't really have it protected. So all the water on the site was going down into the storm drain, and if you see where it's coming down, if you look in the little pipe there, you can see it popping down in the bottom, and it was going directly into the creek. So now they really just created a direct conduit to the creek, where before they sort of had a little bit of buffer, the road, but now it's going directly to the creek. So this is what it looked like. So here's the discharge directly into the creek, and they had silt fence. Well, the silt fence never had a chance. I mean, it's just, that's not what silt fence does. It doesn't work that way. So, and down below, I talked about the actual rock bags. Those aren't working either. It's actually, some of the water is going straight down, but it hits another storm drain and goes directly across into the creek. So major problem on this particular site. The problem is they had multiple chances to get out of trouble and they never did it. And the lesson here is if you have a regional board inspector or the county comes along or somebody comes along and says, hey, you need to do better than this, you need to do better than that. Because one of the things in this case, we sort of did a joint thing. I was working really closely with the local municipality to deal with this particular project, like I do on all municipalities I work with. And we were really trying to resolve this issue. And it turns out they just really didn't understand the permit. They just felt like as long as it didn't discharge, what's the problem? Well, I was trying to get ahead of it and say when it rains, it's going to discharge, which it did. So that's just a little case study. We end up with a lot of these, but this one's unfortunate. For me, it's really unfortunate because it didn't have to happen. There are some sites where they're just really difficult, building in the winter, When it really rains, you're just going to have problems. There's not much you can really do. This is not one of those. This could have been solved way up front. So that's the lesson there.
Rich, what were the fines on that site?
I can't talk about it. I just can't talk about it. So I just can't talk about the case itself, but it's an enforcement action, yes.
What would you have done differently?
Well, I mean, I would have used, well, let me keep going, and then I'll go through that, because that's a great question. What would I have done differently? So one of the things is finally they used more plastic, but also more straw. So it gets a little bit better. So you can still see some dirt, but it is better. And so, you know, this looks a lot different than the first picture. And so now, it's still, though, it's straw. There's a lot of other BMPs available. So what would be BAT-BCT? Hydromulching, hydroseeding. You probably don't want to use hydroseeding on this particular site because you're going to, not this site, but the other site I was talking about, because they're going to get back in there and disturb it, and then you just ruin the seed. That doesn't make any sense. There's no point to that. But there's also HydroStraw, which is a new product that works really well. It's a chopped up straw, but it's in a matrix and it sticks down really good. Bonded fiber matrix, Caltrans used BFM pretty successfully eventually on the Sonora bypass towards the end. And then erosion control blanket. There's a number of things, combination things they could have done on this project that would have made a huge difference. But these are things that are out there. There's a lot of different products for different things, Flexterra, FGM. There's a bunch of, I not quote a bunch of names, but there's all these things that work really well in certain situations. And one of the things that I've really suggested to contractors, builders, and owners is talk to a hydroseeder and have them take a look at it and see what they think. You know, if the straw itself isn't working, which clearly it wasn't in that case, then, you know, come up with something different. Talk to a hydroseeder, have them come out. They know what the options are. They're going to know how to help you the best, especially in a situation like that. And one of the problems with that situation in that case was they kept coming out and rerunning over their BMPs. That's similar to the Caltrans Sonora bypass. What they'd do is they'd install the BMPs and then they'd run right back over them because they were grading those slopes. And then before it rained again, they'd have to come back and put more BMPs in. So consequently, Caltrans spent a lot of money on the Sonora bypass because they had to keep reinstalling BMPs over and over and over and over. But that's what the permit requires. For risk level 2, both active and inactive sites have to be covered with erosion control before a rain event. And up in this area, everything's risk level 2 or risk level 3. Most of it's risk level 2. So both active and inactive, and people forget that. So that's really an important point because when we're driving around before a rain event, even a day before, we're seeing if people are actually getting out there and taking care of the active stuff too. And some of these products that are on this list, you also have to put down probably 24 to 48 hours ahead of time because if they don't cure, they're not going to work. If you put BFM down 2 hours before it rains, it's just going to wash off. And Caltrans did that multiple times on the bypass, and it just literally solidify and run off, and you'd have a bald spot at the top, and all the bonded fiber matrix would be at the bottom, which, you know, doesn't work too well. So just really got to plan ahead, and that was stormwater management, and that's one of the things. So here, I think this is BFM they're spraying on this slope. This is up in the foothills, but pretty easy to spray, not that expensive. It's a good, effective best manager practice. Any other questions regarding that or, okay. Fiber rolls, this is the wildlife friendly fiber roll. It's important to use the wildlife friendly for a couple reasons. One is you don't have to remove it at the end of the project. When we do an NOT, if there's anything that's netted, you have to remove it, including blanket. So if you're going to use the netted blanket, netted fiber rolls, you have to pull it out. If you use this kind, there's a bunch of different types. There's just one of them. It's burlap one. If you use the wildlife friendly, you can leave it in place. You don't have to remove it. Eventually, it'll just rot away. You'll end up with the stakes, but you can pull those later. So this is a different staking pattern because you're just kind of staking both sides. Caltrans sometimes will run a rope over the top, too, to hold it down. No matter what, though, you got to trench it in because it's round, so you want to make sure you trench it or it'll just cut underneath. And that's happened to a number of sites last year, too. They just dropped it on the ground. You know, it's round. It's got tiny little bit touch in. The water just goes right under. It's not going to work very well. So fiber rolls work really well. I like them. They're good for cutting up the slopes. If you want to divide up the slope, because if you can slow the flow of the water down a slope, you're going to get less erosion. And the permit also requires them on slopes. But just use the wildlife friendly, and I'll talk about entrapment in a minute. Yeah.
Rich, if you go back to that previous slide,
Yep.
you might talk about the tracking too that they did there.
Yeah, they tracked, they did, yeah, I didn't talk about tracking. Tracking back and forth horizontally across the slope is a good thing. You don't want to go up and down. You want to make sure that you've got the, did they track? Yeah, they did track the right way. That's got some impact on it from the rain, so it's hard to tell. But tracking is a good basic BMP. What's that?
You explain the direction of the tracking you said just then.
Yeah, you want to make sure the grousers create little, break it up. Yeah, you don't, if you go across, essentially, then you're just creating little rills automatically. So you want to make sure you go up and down.
We identify if that's wildlife, but they're not.
Well, I'll go through it in a minute. If it has a net, it's not wildlife friendly. So the regular fiber rolls you see a lot of times, they'll just have that netting on them. If it has the netting, it's not wildlife friendly. And even if it's biodegradable or photodegradable, it lasts for years. I mean, I've seen this stuff for like 5 years. I've been tripping on it on construction sites. And so finally, then eventually I'll just try and pull it up, but because it just takes forever. And if it creates entrapment, I'll go through that in a minute, it creates another problem. Silt fence, you want to make sure it's installed properly. I use this picture all the time, but I just like it. It goes like half a mile they did this, so they had to go clear down the hill and reinstall all this silt fence. It was just the worst silt fence job I've ever seen in my life. And so there's a line on the silt fence, and it's at the bottom. I think it's orange on this one. And you have to stake it in to that line. It has to be down there tight. So when I'm looking at silt fence, I go along and pull on the top, or I'll kick the bottom, one or the other. But I'll just pull on it to see if I can get it to pull up. So if someone just chucked dirt on the outside of it, I can pull it up. It's not going to work, and then I'll make them reinstall it. So silt fence is still a decent BMP, but just make sure there's a number of things. If you use the wood stakes, half the time they fall over. They break and fall over, so a lot of people use metal stakes. But there's a number of different types of silt fence now. There's wire-back silt fence. There's all these different types of silt fence out there that will really work pretty effectively. So, it's still a good BMP, but it just needs to be installed. It's also high maintenance. I was told that for every $1 you spend on silt fence, you spend about $1 maintaining it. So it can be pretty high maintenance. So that you might want to think about maybe another option if you can do that. So again, you got to make sure it's trenched down. You got to backfill it, because what it's going to do is the sediment's going to pile up behind the silt fence, and it's you want to make sure it can hold it. It doesn't just fall over, and that's what often happens with silt fence. That being said, I've seen wire-back silt fence where it had a lot of sediment against it. Essentially, it created a debris dam and didn't break. So I mean, it was pretty robust, but it can work if you design it correctly. But don't ever put it, I don't have a photo, but don't put it across a flow too. I had one last year. I didn't put the photo in there, but where the person put it right across the stream flow. So the stream just came, backed up, and created a little lake. It blew through the silt fence and ripped out half the hill at the same time. So that didn't work so well. So you got to kind of think these things out. So I'm going to talk about entrapment now. And what happens with entrapment is we're having a real issue with snakes, lizards, birds. I get all kinds of critters that get stuck in erosion control blanket. And part of it is they'll get in there, they'll freak out, and they'll start wiggling around. I've cut some of them out, and they're totally freaking out. We've saved a couple snakes, and I think I saved a bird once, and everything else is pretty well dead. So all permits now, Fish and Wildlife permits, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, our 401s, all require wildlife-friendly erosion control products. So if you use the netted blanket or the netted fiber rolls, at the end of the project, you're going to have to pull them out. We had a project up in Placer County. It was a large project. They put erosion control blanket out. Turns out it was a netted kind. Our inspector went out, didn't know that. It was right next to Orchard Creek. Went out and took a look at it. It was all netted, had to pull it all out. It cost him $30,000. We felt horrible. $30,000 mistake. And they had to replace it with the non-netted or the flexible joint. So kind of what I'm talking about, I'm going to pass this out, pass this around, is that is the flexible joint stuff. My sample's getting kind of beat up, so just, but what it's got is it's got a flexible joint on it and it'll spread apart. So if a critter gets stuck in there, it'll kind of move. And there's a number of different ways that you can use the wildlife friendly. Here's a bird that's stuck. So we see all kinds of things. In Fish and Wildlife, I've been out with multiple wardens where they've said you've got to pull that out and you have to replace it. So just don't use it and avoid the problem because it's just not worth it. So what the issue is it has a fixed aperture. If you stick your finger in there, if you try and stick your finger in there and pull it out, it's really hard to pull out. It's plastic, and you just stick it in there, and you can't get it out. And that's what happens to any kind of bird or anything else. There's no way they can chew through it. There's just nothing they can really do. So animal-friendly products or blankets with soil backfill. If you completely backfill them, that sometimes will work. The movable joint, which is the one I'm passing around. There's a netless blanket, but it's not very heavy. It's really lightweight, but if you have a situation where you're not going to walk on it or work on it and there's no hoofed animals around, then you can use the netless. It works pretty well. The thing about the netless, and I don't have a sample of it, but it kind of hugs the soil contour too, so it works pretty well. But it's just not very tough, and it won't last more than maybe 6 months or something. It gets you through a winter, but that's about it. The other thing is the opening of the net. There were some nets or some blanket with really small openings, but we don't see those too much anymore. And then the three-dimensional cuspated is just the real heavy turf reinforcement mats, the real heavy ones that are used for scour. They don't create entrapment because there's no spaces in them, essentially. But just keep that in mind because it's something that frustrates me when I go out and do an inspection. Someone's used the non-wildlife friendly, it's right on a creek, and I got to tell them to pull it out and replace it. And so, the other thing to think about, yeah, no, go ahead.
You done before you leave blankets, and you talked about best practices that you see work well with getting vegetation to grow when your blanket is present. Do you see people putting seed under the blanket, over the blanket, both?
Both. I think both. Caltrans uses it, they called it the 4-step, which that was the first time I heard of a 4-step program. So they use seed under and seed over. And in some areas it worked fairly well. In other areas it didn't work at all. The problem we're having right now, as everybody knows, we're in a drought. So if you use seed, typically if it pops at all, it'll pop and then it'll die back. And hopefully you've got some root structure. But we're having real issues right now with getting seed to grow. So a lot of times what I'll see it seeded under the blanket. They'll seed underneath, they'll put the blanket on top. But it depends how dense the blanket is. If you have a really thick blanket, a coir blanket or something like that that's supposed to last 4 or 5 years, it's really heavy. It's going to be pretty hard to get something to grow through there because it's not really what it's for. It's designed more for, and I see that on slopes sometimes it's designed more for like the bottom of a channel so it doesn't scour out. That's a different type of blanket. So you want to make sure that you're picking blankets that fit, if you're going to try and plant through them, that actually work for that application. Jute, I still see jute used. Jute is sometimes it works well, sometimes it doesn't. The problem is if the spaces are too big when it rains, the rain just through there and it still runs off. And if anybody that saw the Sonora bypass, that's what happened a lot of times to their jute. The rain was coming right through, it would saturate underneath, and then it would slump down. So on some of those, you'd see the whole hill would just literally, it'd be like a slip plane. It just comes sliding down, and the blanket would kind of bunched up at the bottom. And that was just because they just really, partially because of the jute, partially because of the soil type. There were a bunch of factors there. The ground was saturated. There were a whole bunch of things that played into that, but it created a real problem. So I like it seeded underneath. I think it works better because you want to make sure that seed you want to make sure it's got good soil contact, and if it doesn't, it's going to germinate and die back anyway. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, we have a site we're going to be working on up on the north coast, so I don't think the water would be a problem. But with blankets, or some blankets that tend to shade the ground too much, so that would the seeds crop, so it doesn't do anything.
Some blankets will shade the ground. I mean, it depends. It also depends if you're south facing, north facing. I mean, there's a lot of other factors involved. How much sun does it get? If it's, in a canyon and it gets a lot of shade, that's an issue too. I mean, Duke, okay. So, I would talk to the manufacturer and just tell them that if you've got that situation, okay, I need erosion control to be up in however long you want it to grow. What type of blanket? How long do you want the blanket to last? I'm curious now. Do you want it to last a year, 2 years?
I want to last, want a stable slope, and in the long term, a stable slope's got to have vegetation, so I want the blanket to last 1 or 2 seasons until the vegetation can take hold enough that it takes over the stability.
So then that's what I would tell the manufacturer and say, what I need, here's where I'm at. I'm at a higher elevation, probably, maybe not.
It's a fairly low elevation, not very far from the coast. But
Okay.
It takes lots.
So you're going to get a lot of rain, though. Yeah, a lot of rain, a lot of sky. So I mean, that's what I would tell them, and I think they can fit you with the blanket, and I'd seed underneath it. But ask them. Say, hey, I need it to grow. What's the best way to do it? I mean, it's always good to go back to the manufacturer or the person that's selling it and saying, okay, what do I need to use? Because they've got a lot of expertise, too, that is helpful, and it's always good to get multiple opinions. Because nothing, erosion, sediment control things, stormwater is really kind of shades of gray. It's not very black and white. And part of why I like it is that, you put it in there and you go, this is going to work great, and then it fails miserably. And then you're like, what? So, I mean, you've got to kind of change things all the time. And so that's part of the reason I like it. It isn't really, there is no right, there is no wrong. It's just what will work best in that situation for that climate, especially with that much rain and temperature. And and it gets cooled there too, so, okay.
Rich?
Yeah.
In addition to the blankets, I know that on the East Sonora bypass, they finally gave up on slope covering and went to a lot of rock. I mean, just tons and tons of rock.
Yes.
What about rock?
Rock is fine.
Is it better to do it as a mix with the other products?
Well, the Sonora bypass has more rock than I've ever seen on any project ever. So it has a lot of rock. And that's great. I mean, that's fine. Rock's available. It's a good best management practice. There's other BMPs out there that work well too, but rock is a good BMP. I mean, yeah, you want to use it in combination with other things. You wouldn't want to just use rock, but we do see rock used. There's also some turf reinforcement mats and some other BMPs called, I'm not going to talk about it, but more green armor, and they're sort of to protect outlets and things like that. It's not in the presentation today, but there's some of those type of things available too. So you don't just have to use rock, but rock is a good BMP. So construction schedule, again, I said it earlier, but if you're gonna work in the winter months, we're probably going to pay attention to your site. That's the bottom line. We've already identified up in Roseville, Placer County, some sites that are going to work in the winter. You can work in the winter, it's fine. Everybody's okay with it. It's just that it's going to cost you more money. It's going to be more challenging. That's all. It's just going to be harder. You're going to have to work harder at it, and you're going to have to spend more money. So a lot of times what happens in the spring, I'll be out on site and I'll talk with the contractor and I said, we spent like $150,000 on BMPs this winter. I said, well, you worked all winter. I'm not surprised, but they're surprised. So you're just going to spend a lot of money. It's just going to cost money. So just keep that in mind. So sometimes it's just the benefit is worth it. Sometimes it's not. So just something to consider.
When you have plans for the work through the winter, that's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
Do you appreciate the opportunity to engage with the project early on? I mean, it's hard sometimes to go flying from one of like the government because they're going to help us. I understand that. But do you appreciate that, or do you just want to do your thing and look for problems?
No. I mean, here's my philosophy. I guess my philosophy on everything I do regarding, what I do at the water board is to protect water quality. That's what I'm doing. So I would much rather meet with the contractor, talk to the contractor, and try and work it out. I'm in the enforcement unit, and I do a lot of enforcement, but, I mean, I don't want to do it. I want to protect water quality. I don't want that stuff dumping into the water so then I can go back and go after the person. I mean, I don't want it to happen at all. So I'd much rather be up front, and I think any regional board, if you're talking about Region 1, they're the same way. I think they're going to want to come out and help you as much as they can. One of the problems we have is limited time. We're covering multiple projects, multiple sites, so we don't always, in every fall I've already had some calls saying, come out, can you walk my site, tell me what to do. We can't exactly tell you what to do. We can't say, here's some beam. Sometimes in the foothills up in this area, I'll say, you know, you could use this, this, or this. I think all three would work. But I'm not going to say do this, because then if it fails and I come back, I'm going to say, well, now I'm going to issue you an NOV, and you're going to go, that's what you told me to do. So that doesn't make any sense, so we can't do that. But it really doesn't matter. But we want to stay engaged. We want to know what you're doing. And one of that brings up a good point. So one of the things is if a regional board inspector comes to your site, know what the heck you're doing. Be able to say, well, what I've got going right now is I've got this. I've got these BMPs installed. Next week I'm going to start this. I realize I have a problem over here. Here's the way I'm going to handle it. And if you can explain your site in a way where we're comfortable that you have a handle on it, we're probably just going to leave you alone. Because we've got other people we go to and they'll go, oh yeah, I didn't see that. Oh yeah, that's bad too. I mean, those are folks that need some attention. And so those are the people we're really going to spend some time with. So just, you know, when it comes to stormwater, I mean, I know everybody, especially on a residential side, I work in a lot of areas around the Bay Area where, you know, things are booming. Some of the housing releases are 100 houses per release. So they're working on 300 houses at once. So these superintendents are just slammed with stuff. And my job is to make sure they care about stormwater too. And so, but I still want them to be able to explain what they're doing. It's a little easier around here because maybe not quite so much stuff going on. But on the other hand, it doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. Just kind of have a plan, know what the plan is. If the plan isn't working, just change it. That's the way it works. So if you have an exceedance, you're going to sample, you have an exceedance. I'll talk about it again in a minute. But then, you know, you're above the numeric action level, the NAL, put more BMPs in. That's what it is. Numeric action level means you got to take an action. So make sure that you take that action. The case I talked about, they didn't take any action at all. They didn't do anything. They exceeded, didn't do anything. Exceeded, didn't do anything. That's not okay. That's a violation of the permit. So that's sort of the way it works. I'm giving you all, what I'm trying to do today is really explain sort of how we look at the permit and kind of, you know, how it sort of rolls out. So if you're going to work in the winter, just be aware that we're going to pay attention. The other thing, the rain event action plan, no one likes REAPs. You need to do the REAP 48 hours before the rain event. But you also need to install the BMPs. So a lot of times what happens is people may work on the REAP, but what they really do is they're trying to install BMPs. And I'll go out and do an inspection during the rain, so I haven't written my REAP yet. I'll say, okay, that's fine. What were you going to put in it? And that's more what I'm concerned about. But you need to do the rain event action plan. There's a couple things that people don't attach to that. Make sure that you're attaching the NOAA weather report. You know, actually print it, staple it on there so we know how much rainfall you actually was forecast. That's one of the things people forget to do. And make sure it's done by a QSP, Qualified Stormwater Practitioner. It's got to be a QSP. Or it could be a QSD, Qualified SWEP Developer too. That's fine. But typically we don't. But the thing is, just make sure it's not the site superintendent's doing this, because that's not what the permit says. And if something goes south later on, what we do is we go through all the paperwork and we look for any inconsistency, and that becomes another violation. So don't fall into that trap. This is just a weather report, good example. But here's exactly what I was talking about. This is a separate enforcement action several years ago, but we went back and they forgot multiple rain events that they should have written a REAP for. That's $10,000 every time they didn't write the REAP, which is crazy because it's just a piece of paper. So just make sure you do it. Make sure your SWEP is on site. I'm still running into sites where there's no SWEP on site. I mean, I know it's uploaded into Smarts, but I need to see it on the site, at least the SWEP map, so I can figure out what the heck you're trying to do. You want to identify the discharge locations. I can't tell you last year how frustrating it was. I'd go out do an inspection. I'll say, where are your discharge locations? And they'd say, well, I'm not sure. You're supposed to be sampling. How are you going to sample a risk level 2 site if you don't know where your discharge locations are? It boggles my mind sometimes. But anyway, so then we'd have to go out, we'd identify the potential, because I don't know for sure, potential discharge locations, and then they'd sample. But, you know, just something to keep in mind. You want to make sure you know where those are. And the other thing is identify your post-construction BMPs. I'm going to talk about that at the end of the presentation today, but post-construction BMPs are a big deal. And what we're doing before we do a termination now, we're asking, what were your post-construction BMPs? If you're in Tuolumne County, you're going to use the calculator, which I'll show in a few minutes. If you're in other counties that have a Phase 2 permit, like Calaveras, you're going to use their own requirements. But I'll talk about that in a minute. But just make sure that you've identified them in the SWEP, what you're going to use. Also, make sure it's updated. I've been to several sites where they've made really pretty wholesale major changes to their facility, the way they're building it. And then they didn't change the SWEP, so it totally doesn't reflect the site. And if you make major changes, make sure it's updated in smarts, too. That's the other thing. Monitoring and inspection, just be aware post-rain event inspections are required on all sites, regardless of the level of activity, even risk level 1. And this gets people in trouble all the time. An inactive site still has to comply with the permit requirements. So if it's inactive and you have a permit, you can terminate it. You can refile for coverage if you want to do that. If you stabilize it, most people don't want to do that. But if you completely stabilize it, you can terminate it and then start again in the spring. Some people do that. But if it's active, you have to go out and you have to do weekly inspections and you have to maintain your BMPs. So if you're in Tuolumne County or Calaveras or wherever, and you're above the snow line and you get a lot of snow, kind of hard to do an inspection when you've got snow covering your BMPs, talk to me, because then I can give you an exemption. I can work with you to relax those requirements. Typically what I'll do is have folks go out once a month, take a look at the site if they can get there, and just make sure that's all stable. But it depends on the site, where it's at, and a lot of other things. But I can work with you on that. But if it's one that's going to be exposed year-round, you still got to go out and you have to do those inspections, just the way the permit works. So this is an inspection report, which says nothing. It's a bunch of checks. Yes, no, no, yes, no. Every inspection report on this particular site for this one looked exactly like this. Didn't say a single thing. When I go out and do an inspection, I'm looking for good things, mostly for photos for classes like this, or I'm looking for bad things, probably for photos classes like this too. But nevertheless, you know, I'm looking at both, and I can always find both. There's both out there. So how can you do an inspection and have nothing wrong with the site? Typically there's something. Just write something down that you're going to improve. I mean, don't make stuff up. If it's perfect, it's fine. But normally that's not the case. So make sure you're writing stuff down and you know what you're going to change. So here's what was wrong. Here's how we're going to fix it. And then the next time, here's how well it worked. You know, so it kind of tells a story. That's probably the best way to describe it. And if you do that, that'll really help. One of the things we do when we do inspections is we look at the inspection reports. We look at them all the time to make sure that you're kind of maintaining your site. Just like I talked about earlier, if you kind of know what's going on at your facility, then it's better for everybody. So no discharge. If, let's say I'm working in Sonora and there's a site 25 miles from here, Sonora gets an inch, I go there, they say we didn't get any rain, or we got 1/10 of an inch. It could be, but if they don't have an on-site rain gauge, I have no way to tell. So I have to use the nearest tipping bucket. And so if they have an issue, I'm going to have to say, well, you know what, you don't have a rain gauge. I'm using a tipping bucket on both sides of you, and they're both at 1 inch. Maybe you're in a rain shadow, but I don't know. So you make sure you have an on-site rain gauge. That's the take-home message here, because you want to really be able to defend yourself. Say, here's how much rain we had. Here's how well my BMPs worked. It's really key. And you want to know, too, if it's at night and you come in the morning and you got 3 inches of rain and your BMPs are really working well, that's awesome. That's what you want to know. But you want to know how much rain you got. And keep in mind, too, that a rain event cannot conclude until there's 48 hours without rainfall. So in Tuolumne County, a rain event can span multiple days, can run for multiple days. So you need to sample, keep sampling until it actually dries up. And if you observe it, yeah, so that pretty much covers that. And then on risk level 2 and 3 sites, you want to take a minimum of 3 samples each day. and make sure that they're representative of the site. I went to a site last year, 5 discharge locations. 2 are turbid, 3 are relatively clear. They sampled the 3 clear and left the 2 turbid they didn't sample, except I was sitting there and I saw them doing it. So we had a chat, but they have to sample at each discharge location. So minimum of 3. So if you've got, they were defined discharge locations marked on the SWEP, and they just decided they're going to look at keep the numbers down. It's numeric action level. It just means you have to improve the BMPs. It doesn't, so don't do that. That was a bad strategy, and I think they learned, and they didn't do it again, so that was good.
So did they need 15 for the day?
Well, I mean, they should have taken at least 5, right, because they had 5 discharge locations, and then they could have used those 5, and I would have gone, okay, fine. So what a lot of folks do is they'll take 2, it just depends on the site. Every site's dynamic, every site's different. But they may take 2, they got 2 main discharge locations. They may take one over here in the morning, the afternoon. It just depends. And it also depends how many sites you're trying to cover. Sonora Bypass had issues because their QSP mostly, was trying to pull so many samples she couldn't get from one end of the site to the other by the time, it took all day. So it depends how big your facility is too, or your site, because sometimes it just takes a while to take those samples. So here's a good example. So you're going to go out, you're going to take your samples, you're going to sample for pH. pH really hasn't been much of an issue in this permit occasionally, but you're going to sample for turbidity. You're going to use your turbidity meter, and typically they cap off at around 1,000 NTUs. Some go higher, most are about 1,000. Here's an example of an enforcement action we had where they wrote, if you can read it, said not, where the arrow goes there, not reportable exceedance. It took me about 4 hours to figure out what that meant. But what they meant was it's above 1,000 NTUs. So since it's above 1,000, you don't have to report it. No, that just means it doesn't make any sense. So clearly this QSP that did this did not understand the permit and made a whole bunch of other critical errors on this particular project, but this was one of them. They got 4.6 inches, tremendous amount of rain, and it was above 1,000. Okay, well that could be. I mean, that's a lot of rain. I mean, I can believe that. But yet, not reportable exceedance doesn't make any sense. So just if it's above 1,000, just put greater than 1,000. You don't have to get the exact number. Sometimes we'll try and cut it so we can figure out if your discharge is like 3,000, 4,000, 2,000, just to get a rough number. But that you don't have to do that. If it's above 1,000, just put greater than 1,000. That's all you got to do. And then just improve your BMPs if they're not working. Simple's good. pH sampling, just some hints. You want to wait a minute for the readings to put your meter in, wait a couple minutes for it to stabilize. Some people do it too quick. You want to fully immerse the probe. You want to properly store the probe. One of the things I've been out doing inspections, and I'll go with people and they'll say, hey, let's do a pH sample. And their probe is so dry, the little bulb's so dry it won't even work. So you gotta keep these things moist or something. So just make sure that you maintain your pH probe. Just a helpful tip. And you want to make sure it's calibrated. I'll use mine, they'll use theirs. Theirs isn't even remotely close to mine. So I have a second one, I use my second one. I'm the same, they're like way off. So what happened is they didn't calibrate their meters, or their probe, and then we'll calibrate it. Now in the industrial permit, it allows pH paper. I think the new construction permit will probably allow folks to use the paper too as an indicator. It's getting a little bit better, but it's just kind of colorimetric, but it's a good indicator. So what I do is I keep the paper, you can't record it, but I keep the paper with me and I'll just dip it in there to see if I get a 12. If it turns purple, mine's purple at 12. If it turns purple, then that's a problem. Then I'll get my actual probe out and actually check to see what the actual number is, just to help. But you can't record that. But it's cheaper than messing around with the probe every single time. Annual report. The annual report period is July 1st through June 30th. I think everybody knows that. Make sure it's due September 1st. Make sure you turn it in. Last year I did multiple inspections on sites just because they didn't turn in their annual report. So not only did we ask for the annual report, we actually did an inspection of their site. A lot of those times we identified other problems. So just, if you want to stay off the radar, turn your report in. And if you've been building less than 3 months, you don't have to submit the annual report. That's the other thing. But So on time, make sure it's complete. That's the other thing. People submitted it incomplete, and that's probably enough there. So I'm not going to talk about notice of termination, but make sure when you do NOTs and SMARTs, again, that you know what your post-construction BMPs are and what they're going to be. I had a number of sites last year that didn't have post-construction BMPs. They were totally done, trying to file an NOT. I had to go out and say, what are you going to do for post-construction? And they're like, well, I'm done. Yeah, well, you're going to have to figure something out. So now they had to put one put a grassy swale in, one planted a bunch of extra trees. You know, so now they had to scramble around at the end of the project. Their engineer's freaking out because they're scrambling around trying to come up with a way to put these post-construction BMPs in to meet the local requirements. And these are in municipalities. So the municipality should have told them that they needed it, number one. That's one thing that bothered me. But the second thing is, and one of them was a commercial site, so it didn't have a lot of space. So they ended up putting some curb cuts and doing some stuff, and it worked out fine, but it was way after the fact. So just make sure it's planned in there. So post-construction BMPs can be pretty easy in the foothills. You know, grassy swale, vegetated swale, the picture's here. There's two main categories. Structural control BMPs and treatment control BMPs would be the two categories. A lot of times people use a combination of both, typically, you'll see. Oops, okay. So treatment control BMPs would be inlet controls, infiltration devices, oil water separators, detention ponds, vegetative swales that reduce pollutants and stormwater discharges. There's a lot of different things that you can use. There's a lot of good information on post-construction BMPs out there. Really good specs, what's effective, the conditions they work in, the pollutants they control. Casco also has a good manual on that, so there's a lot of information out there if you want to pick post-construction BMPs. In Tuolumne County is not a phase 2. So you're going to use this calculator. This is a horrible picture of the calculator. I need to put another one in the presentation. But you're going through and you're looking for credits. So you're looking for credits to come up with a number. And so these are what's available for crediting. So it's things like porous pavement, tree planting, downspout disconnection. You can read the list, green roof, stream buffer. Stream buffers work really well. Everybody likes stream buffers. That's a good way to get credit. If you can just slide back 20 feet, 25 feet, something like that, you get credit for that. That's a good way to go sometimes, especially if you're along a creek channel. But you want to come up with enough points to make the calculator work. If you're in a phase 2 municipality, they have their own requirements. So what we do is we'll ask, did you meet the phase 2 requirements? And if you say yes, sometimes we call and say, did they meet the phase 2 requirements? So we're double checking there. And so make sure that you're meeting those requirements. And they'll have specific standards that they want to see. Duke?
The porous pavement, the porous concrete, we haven't had a lot of luck with those. They do tend to plug up with time. So that's a pretty expensive treatment. And to have it plug up on you and then nothing.
I know, and what you're trying to do with post-construction BMPs, it's a great question, is you're trying to treat the stormwater for perpetuity, so to speak, whatever that means. And so you know, if it's going to plug up, and I've had the same issue with porous pavement, it's just on the calculator. This was I don't know who came up with this list, but it was just a bunch of basic BMPs. What most people do is do the downspout disconnection, they'll do the stream buffers, the vegetated swales, and then they'll also improve the landscaping soil quality to do some stuff there. But there's a combination, and they'll plant trees. They'll just put extra trees in, and you also get credit for that too. So if for some reason you try and use a calculator and you can't make it work, and you say, look, I just can't, there's no way. I mean, I'm trying. I can't stick enough stuff in here. Let me know, because sometimes they'll use structural BMPs in combination with these. So maybe if it's a commercial site, you're going to have like an oil water separator or something else in there anyway, so you get credit for that. But that may not be enough. Then you've got to, and this happened, I think, with one of the big box stores that went in Sonora. I had to work with them because they went down here, they couldn't do it. They put in structural BMP and they still couldn't get enough points. So I think they did they did something, and I can't remember now. They did some additional things to try and fit that. Yeah. That's just where you, instead of, that's basically where you just run it into the grass, essentially. You run it into instead of going straight to the street. A lot of times residential, they'll just pipe it straight to the street. So now you're running it through, typically they'll build a little rain garden or something else, some rock, it'll sink down in there and it'll have an area to sort of settle out, and then it'll just perk through the grass. Not a grassy swale. It's a lot of times they'll plant trees. I don't think I have a picture of one. It's just, it'll have a little, it's like it's a little depression, and it'll have gravel in it, or mulch sometimes. Sometimes they're mulch. And it'll have loose soil. It'll have some trees and some plants to uptake that stuff. And then it'll just kind of soak through the yard or soak. We see them on commercial too. It's the same thing though. But it's just designed to sort of, instead of that piping it straight out, just let it sort of perk back in the ground. With the drought particularly, there's a lot of emphasis right now on getting water, trying to recharge the groundwater. But if you've got rocks, it's not going to work very well. And down in the valley, we've got clay soils, and that's not working very well either. But depending on the soil type, it can be pretty effective to trying to recharge the groundwater. So these are the areas I typically cover. It's a huge area, but at any rate, I'm bouncing all over right now. And so, but if you have any questions, let me know. The easiest way to get a hold of me is to email me. And just send me the question. Even if it's I have a friend that has a site that has I don't care. I want to help you kind of figure out your particular project and get it so that, you don't have any issues. It's important for us just to make sure that, we're protecting water quality, like I said earlier, but we want to help you. That's part of why we're here. We're just not here to run around and we really are the government. We're trying to help, actually, surprisingly. So we do want to help you any way we can. So, questions? Okay. Ooh.
Okay, so my first question is, can you talk a little bit about sites that are less than an acre but still impact water quality? Do you have to go through the same process? And because I think people incorrectly assume, well, I can do anything to harm water quality as long as the site's less than an acre disturbed, which obviously is not the case. And the second question is, can you talk about the enforcement process a little bit? I see a lot of my fellow consultants using scare tactics that, you roll up on site and write $10,000 violation tickets before you drive off, and obviously that's not true either.
No, it's not. So what was the first question again? Sorry.
The first question was addressing sites that are less than an acre.
Okay, good.
Still
I got
impacting quality.
So sites less than an acre are a huge problem for water quality. What we rely in that case is a local municipality, because they still require you to have best manager practices, even if it's less than an acre. So we work closely with them to make sure that sites are protected. In Amador, Calaveras, and Tuolumne counties particularly, I'm constantly working with Public Works and other folks I'll go out and I'll identify a site and I'll say, hey, this is less than an acre, but it's not very good. What's going on? And I'm constantly talking to the municipalities about, what's going on. We need them to install more BMPs, that kind of thing. There is a way for us to enforce on those sites if we have to. We try not to, so we try and just work through the municipality. A lot of times the small sites are easy to manage. That's the biggest thing. Most of the time it isn't a big deal. Just put some BMPs down and you're good to go. It's just that they don't have any BMPs. But doing nothing will not work. And so we're constantly trying to root those folks out and we're really helpful saying, hey, just go get some basic BMPs, put them down here, it'll work fine. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. So we're constantly working with that.
The enforcement process?
Then, yeah, Duke, were you going to add to that?
Just to feedback into Ron's question about the less than 1 acre, that less than 1 acre are a requirement for when you're dealing with commercial and industrial.
Right. Right. So it depends where we're at. Some counties do it differently. Some counties just pretty much anybody that does anything needs a permit. I've got one county, one municipality that even if you put a shed, I think it's over 50 square. It's a small little footprint. You have to have a permit. So it's all the way from there to not a lot of stuff. So it kind of runs all over the place. But typically we work with the municipality. Enforcement-wise, what happens when we do enforcement? We're going to come out to this facility or site. We're going to do an inspection. If we see problems, we're going to talk to you. We're going to say, hey, here's what we're seeing. I've been doing this now for 18 years. I'm going to say, based off my experience, this isn't going to work very well. I kind of see where you're going, but you need to improve the BMPs. You need to do better than this. Once I say that, I'm coming back. I guarantee you I'm coming back. And once we're on a site, I was going to say locked onto a site because that's kind of what it is. I'll just say it. We're on there, and we'll stay locked onto that site until the problem goes away. Because that's what we do. We're there to protect water quality. So I'll go out, do my initial inspection. I'll write it up. Typically, if it's bad enough, I'll issue a notice of violation. Sometimes I'll just go out and say, I've gone to some facilities where I'll say, or sites where I'll just say, just make it go away. Just make it, I don't want to see it again. Just make it go away, put some BMPs down, and let's just start over here. Other sites are bad. I'll just say, look, you really need to make significant improvements. Then I'll come back. If I see problems again, I'll issue a notice of violation. If I issue a notice of violation, it'll require you to do a whole bunch of stuff. It'll require you to submit a bunch of reports, to write up a bunch of stuff nobody wants to do. And the reason why we're doing that is because nobody wants to do it. So what we're trying to make the point that, hey, you need to ramp your project up. You need to do a better job. And in order to do that, here's the information you really need to get a handle on your site. That's all we're really trying to do. We can go directly from the notice. We don't even have to issue a notice of violation, but we do. We can go directly from that notice of violation right to administrative civil liability. So sometimes what we'll do is it takes us a long time to do an administrative civil liability, forever. Sometimes it seems like, not always. But so what will happen is in the meantime, we may issue a second NOV if you continue to have problems. So the take-home message is, if we come out, we identify an issue, just fix it, make it go away. Put the extra money into it. Just make it go away because you're way ahead. It's pay me now, pay me later. You may as well just make it go away early on. And that's the biggest thing. And my job, a lot of times I get very frustrated with some of these sites where I have to write an ACL because I'm talking to the owner. I'm talking to the construction manager. I'm talking to the municipality. I'm trying everything. Do you hunt? Do you fish? Do you have kids? I'm trying everything I can to get them to sort of consider, what do I need to do to get you to protect this site? We're trying everything we can. And then, eventually if they decide not to do it, that's the way it goes. And then that's when we kind of start down that ACL route. And those get really big. I've had it from $10,000 on up to $3 million. Caltrans was 2 point something. So, but I had another one not too long ago for $1 million. So they get really big. Some of them are fairly small. I had one maybe 10 years ago where I drove up on a site. The guy's discharging really turbid water, and he's pumping it directly into the storm drain, which goes to a creek that has a TMDL on it, total maximum daily load. So we're trying to protect this creek. It's Salado Creek is the name of the creek. And so he's pumping it. I drive up in my truck. I look down at him like this. He's sitting, he's got down by the pump. And he goes, "Are you at the water board?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I told him we'd get caught." And so that was $10,000 just because I went, what am I going to, I don't have a choice. You just sealed the deal. So, and I went to the superintendent and he goes, "Damn, I knew. And I was like, well, why are you doing it? There are other options out there. So there's always other options out there. So just don't do that because it was just a bad situation. And it was, obviously it was kind of humorous, but not really because that turbid water, really high pH water too, really had a really milky white color to it. It was nasty stuff, went right into the creek and created a problem. So then they had to deal with Fish and Wildlife too, with Fish and Game at the time, because Fish and Game also gave them fined them. So that's just a lesson there. So that's kind of our enforcement. But we're not going to come out typically and issue an ACL on the first visit. Stormwater is, as I said earlier, it's not black and white. It's a shade of gray. And so you can install your BMPs, get them ready for the winter, and it really rained. We get a really hard first rain, I guarantee it won't all work. It's just not going to. You're going to have to go back. You're going to have to fix some stuff. You're going to have to upgrade. I know that. So when I'm out doing my inspections the first time, first rain events, I'm just looking to see what works and what doesn't. I'm more curious. As long as you're trying to get it dialed in, you know, that's fine. And that's kind of the way the permit works. And it's designed to sort of, you add BMPs until you get to a point where you just don't have any issues. Other questions?
No. Anyone else? I'll pass the mic.
Hey, Rich, I know that we're dealing with the fires right now. We do have representatives from Calaveras County.
Yes.
Anyone that has a fire, and you were asking about the 1 acre threshold.
Yes.
And some of those issues, Calaveras County enforcement. So, did you want to ask your question?
Nothing yet. I'm not really involved in too much of the actual fire.
Well, one of the things we're working, I'm working with Calaveras on a number of different things right now. But one of the things we're working on is trying to relax the permit requirements for people that rebuild their homes if they're over an acre. And I'm actually going back after this presentation to the state board downtown in Sacramento to discuss that very topic. We've been dealing with it for about, it seems like forever. I've been trying to come up with a way to reduce it, but we're trying to reduce those permit requirements for folks that have to rebuild, because there was some talk at the town hall meeting that the county was going to waive all their fees, and I don't know if that's true or not, because that was a supervisor that said that at the town hall meeting. So I didn't know how to take that, but that's what got said. But even before that, we were working on sort of reducing our permit fees and trying to come up with a way to help folks out that are impacted by the fire. I'm working both on the Butte fire and the Valley fire, so for both those fires to come up with some way to help.
Yeah, are you talking about a reduction in permit fees as well as a reduction in allowable discharge from the site?
No. I mean, this is, I'll talk to you offline. I don't want to talk about it on, since it's taped. But we're working with the fire areas to come up with however we can help. We've got folks that are on it's not the BEAR team, but there's a state version of the BEAR team through OES. We actually have people that are on that team. I'm on the team. I'm not doing the assessment, but I'm real active in trying to coordinate stuff between the two fires. And so we're working on that. We're working on a number of different things to try and make it easier for folks to rebuild, to go in and clean up, and still hopefully protect water quality. So,
Thank you, Rich.
Sure.
We really appreciate you coming down here and talking. Again, this will be recorded so that